Thank you, thank you. Can we hear it one more time for our choir and for Fred and Juan Lorenz? Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. In that last song that we just heard, Karen Drucker, who wrote that song, shares that God is our source, God is our power, God is everything we need. And so as we express God as joy, God as love, God as peace, we are recognizing our connection to God, but we are also recognizing our creative power of love, of joy, and of peace. It's recognizing that we can create love, joy, and peace here on earth as it is in heaven. And heaven is that higher mindset in which we can fulfill our greatest good as the source of power. And so when we're in that higher consciousness, we are using our creative power. So if we are living our fullest life, we are using that love, that joy, and that peace, and all the attributes that define God as our source, as our own good here on earth, as it is in our higher mindsets. And so that creative power is the message of Easter, the power to resurrect, which means the ability to rise, to reawaken, to reimagine. And so let's take this moment now to do that. So I want to invite all of us to go down memory lane. And as we go down memory lane, think about all the images of your own life from the minute you were born to the minute we are experiencing right now. And as we flip through that photo album or through those pictures, we recognize that our image has evolved. Maybe we had some cute hairstyles. Maybe we didn't, right? And maybe our wardrobes evolved, or maybe they haven't. Maybe we saw that in those pictures, there were different milestones. In those pictures, there were different relationships. There are people that are in our lives now that weren't back then, and so forth. And so all of those moments led to rising, to resurrecting, to the place we're sitting in right now. That is the creative power. So if we missed on all those opportunities, we are not living our best life. And so as we look at our creative power, we go to those moments in life where we're being challenged, like going through a divorce. Yes, yes. Or going through those challenging moments of losing loved ones. I'm sure during the pandemic we have lost a couple of loved ones. I have lost a couple of my very own this year. We have also lost jobs. And so in those moments, it's hard for us to be creative. And yet, in the short term, it seems like it's an end because the discomfort, because of the pain, because of the unfamiliarity of the changes that we have to endure during that time. However, the power to rise is always there. It just takes time for us to transform, to heal, to reawaken ourselves. And so in the broader perspective, that one ending is a catalyst for life, to reawaken, to re-identify ourselves with a new image without that relationship, with that start. However, if we're awakened to that higher consciousness, we can experience peace and joy as we remember why our loved ones really mattered. And we enjoy the prosperity that comes with letting go of a job to reap the benefits of a new one. That is the resurrection. That is raising our consciousness as the creative power. Another great wisdom teacher that I like to refer to when we're talking about reinvention is Mother Nature. Mother Nature. Yes, as we celebrate Earth Month, we recognize the power of Mother Nature. Mother Nature has 4 different seasons, and every season has a beginning and has an ending. And every ending is essential for the new beginning. For example, we just went through a winter. It's essential for winter to end so spring can begin. That goes with saying that our consciousness of winter must end so that new ideas can begin. We must be in the consciousness of life so that we can see life as a cycle of life, as the power to resurrect and to reinvent ourselves. So our lesson today is don't stop creating. In other words, do not expect the power of creativity to function in fear, but rather to break the absence of life. So I'm going to say that one more time. Do not expect the power of creativity to function in fear, but rather to break the absence of life. And so when we look at the stories of the resurrection, and yes, I'm saying stories because there's more than one. There's many stories of how we raise our consciousness. In Unity, we draw people from different faiths. And so I invite all of us to listen to these stories as our own personal journey of how to live a triumphant journey of creativity. And so when we look at the stories, I want to set the setting first. How many of us here and on Zoom have ever felt like we didn't matter, like we didn't have a sense of belonging? Maybe someone told us that we weren't destined to do great things. So when we bring ourselves into that mindset, we may feel discouraged. But the story of the resurrection is completely the opposite. It's recognized like, yes, there was discouragement, but yes, there is the encouragement to be a catalyst of life. And so in the story of Jesus' resurrection, that was one event. There were many events, as the Old Testament shares. And one of them was that the Israelites, the people from Israel, during the time of the Old Testament, they were destined to fulfill their greatest good. However, they had people who turned them down, who beat them physically, who beat them emotionally. And so this happened over and over and over. And when something happens over and over and over, it becomes a pattern, whether it's a good pattern or a bad pattern. And so this pattern becomes a belief. And so the belief that the Israel people had during that time is that they were not worthy. They were not deserving. They lived in discouragement. And that discouragement became a norm. And so the power of this story is the role of the prophets in this story. The role of the prophets in this story was to inspire all the discouraged people from Israel to go back to the promised land, to go back to the original idea. And so what is the original idea? What is the promised land? The original idea is God is my source. God is my power. God is everything I need. God is joy. God is peace. God is love. And so when we connect to that original idea of peace, of love, we are going back to the original idea as the idea to fulfill the promised land. And the promised land are all of the divine ideas that create the essence and spirit of what God is. It is the fulfillment of your dreams, of your goals, of your intentions. So in order for us to fulfill our dreams, our intentions, and our goals is to enter into the consciousness of what we expect. So in other words, if we are experiencing a lot of problems in our life, we can't go with the mindset of problems because we're going to get more problems. But if we shift to the idea of what God is, the solution, then we set our mindset on the solution. Therefore, we have the receptive mind to create more solutions, to fulfill that promised land. That is our journey to resurrect, to reinvent ourselves. And so in that story of Jesus being resurrected, there's a moment where two women, or a couple of women, go towards the body where Jesus is being stored. And they recognize that there is this boulder that is blocking their entrance. And so they turn to one another and they ask, who's going to help us? Who's going to help us? And maybe in our own personal story, we've come to a place similar like that, where we're being discouraged. And we go towards fulfilling our greater good by blessing our good. And yet, there's this huge boulder, this huge limitation that is blocking us from fulfilling it. And we ask ourselves, who's going to help us? Who's going to help us? And so in that moment of the story, the women look up and they recognize by shifting their perspective that the boulder has been moved. And so the women are witnesses that Jesus has risen in that moment. And in that moment, an angel appears. And so what the angel represents is our inner guidance. When we let go of our boulder, whatever that boulder is, whether it's fear, guilt, doubt, worry, once we release that by changing our perspective, we're open to that inner guidance that instructs us. And so that inner guidance instructs them to share the message with the disciples. So this part of the story is sharing with us that whenever we are attuned with the consciousness that is our creative power, it spreads. It has the power to spread. And when it has the power to spread, the people who are receptive, they will receive it. But also, the power of spreading your joy, your love, disintegrates the fear, the guilt, the worry, the doubt. Think about it. When you're having a joyful moment, in that joyful moment, there is no fear. Otherwise, you wouldn't be joyful, right? So the same thing goes with, in order for us to enter the promised land, to achieve our fullest good, we must return to the original idea, to our source. And so you probably want to see this in a practical setting. I'm going to give you one. So this past year, my dad died early on, and so I've been checking up on my mother to see how she's doing. And one of the ways is I call her. And when I call her, in one of the conversations, she shares, you know, I don't have any food in my house. I don't have anything to eat. And so I know she's lying. Yes. And the reason I know she's lying is because my loving brother, who lives next door to her, fills her refrigerator with food. So I know she's lying. And she knows that I know that she's lying. And so within that phone conversation of not having any food, she realizes she's speaking to a minister, right? And she's also speaking to her son. And so that shift of consciousness of who she's speaking to, she realizes her source. Her source is joy. And that joy is her children. And I happen to be one of those children. And so now she's inviting me over to her house for dinner. So she went from not having food to inviting me to dinner. So she's creating all these recipes in her mind of what she's going to make me. And so this power is the power of resurrection, the ability to shift from the place where you feel disconnected, disempowered, alone, to the place where we're creative, where we're connecting to joy, we're connecting to love, we're connecting to peace. And that symbol, those images, could be all of those pictures you created in your memory lane photo book, which brings you to this moment right here, right now. That is the power of resurrection. So what is ours to do? It is to change our perspective, get yourself in the right consciousness so that boulder size limitation will be removed and inspiration shall continue to flow. And if we do that, we are connecting to the highest good. We are embracing that Christ within you has risen because you are in that higher consciousness. That divine pattern that Jesus had, you have too. That presence of God is also dwelling with you right now. It's available right now. We are not here to live in a lower consciousness, but to rise as our higher consciousness. We are not here to fall into the perceived failures, but to rise in the process of our fulfillment. We are not here to disempower others into the misery, but to rise and uplift them. I know this power is powerful when we embrace that highest good as ourselves, the greater good right where you are. Our greatest songwriters and musicians, they have written about the misery of some of their relationships. And yet, they have risen to become some of our best recording artists. Authors like J.K. Rowling, who wrote the Harry Potter series, received multitudes of rejections, and yet she has risen to become one of the most powerful authors of our time. Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, Nelson Mandela, Jesus have all seen the injustice of our world. And yet, too, they have risen because they have shown us the new way. And that new way is the creative power that we get to express. Amen. Yes, let's say amen to that. Amen. All right. Breathe that in. Breathe in that truth. If we look at Jesus' ministry, his entire ministry, not just that one day of Easter, but when we look at his entire ministry, he was there to uplift others. He was not motivated because we were missing the mark. He was motivated because that potential is within you. That potential lives within you. And with a higher consciousness, that too shall rise. And so we remember that God is our source. God is our power. And it gives us everything we need. We know that we have risen when we know that we are a catalyst for life. So let's continue to rise and never, ever stop creating. Thank you, and so it is.